John Hook's Newsmaker starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker. The Republican National Convention begins on Monday in Milwaukee. I'll be there bringing you live coverage of Mr. Trump's vice presidential pick, his acceptance speech on Thursday night, and every breaking major event in between. So with that, let's bring in an old pro who knows a lot about everything political, author and professor emeritus at University of Chicago, Charles Lipson. He writes regularly for Spectator magazine, Real Clear Politics, which is where I first found him, and others as well. His columns are available for free at charleslipson.com. Charles, great to see you.
It's a pleasure to see you.
Okay, so we've got the Republican convention. I know we'll get into the main event, which is going to be Chicago. But the Republican convention, what do you expect there? I know as we're taping right now, no selection has been made for VP for Donald Trump. So, we won't go there yet. But where do you think the Republican Party is right now? Because I thought Donald Trump might be dead and buried after January 6th. This might be one of the most amazing political comebacks we've seen since Nixon.
Yes, although Joe Biden's comeback
Good point.
with Clyburn endorsing him after Joe Biden was essentially out of it.
Good point.
It was pretty impressive, too. I think the problem that Biden has now is that I don't think he can come back, not from the polling, but from what's driving the polls down, which is that people see a real cognitive decline. And the media, which would normally be the hydrogen in his balloon, is now even more widely mistrusted after clearly failing in their duty to report what was going on for the last 6+ months.
Okay, so where does that leave Kamala Harris if they were to make a change? And that right now is looking increasingly unlikely because Joe Biden is digging in. He's saying he's not going anywhere. And he's got the delegates. He's got 3,900 delegates, I believe, in Chicago. That's committed to him. He earned that during the primaries. I don't know how you undo that.
You can't undo it. Biden himself would have to undo it by taking the vote on the first round and then saying, I welcome the vote that you gave me. I earned it, but I don't think I can serve a full next term. And so I'm going to release my delegates. The problem then would be, I think, that the Democrats would blow up their coalition if they chose anybody but Kamala Harris. And she is even less popular right now than Joe Biden, although Joe Biden's numbers at 36% are the lowest in recorded polling history for a president.
So this is no small thing. I mean, we're into Carter territory at the height of economic troubles in the late 70s. Is that where we are?
I think that's right. The public, I think, will largely, there's a coalition behind Trump that really wants Trump. And of course, he's by now the really dominant candidate. But I think beyond that pro-Trump coalition, I think most of the other votes will be against. There'll be Democrats voting against Trump, and there'll be independents voting, I think, against Biden. And that carries real implications down ballot. I don't have to tell you that in Arizona, but it's going to be a big deal in Nevada, in Montana, in Pennsylvania, for the one Democrat remaining in Ohio for the U.S. Senate. They've given up on some states. I see fundraisers for the Democrats, and they've given up on Florida and Texas. So they're really worried. And until recently, the idea was that they would almost certainly hold the House. But I think that's now in doubt, too.
Charles, do you see a scenario where Biden would still maybe drop out? I think if you get to the convention and drop out, boy, you talk about late in the game. You have upended your own party at that point. You would think he'd have to do it sooner rather than later. But if he were to do so, it raises the specter, if he can't run for president, should he be the sitting president?
Well, I think serious people are asking that question, the same one you just asked, but he could certainly make the argument that I'm well enough to do the job now, but I don't think it's fair to ask the public to vote for me for the next 4 years.
That would be an incredible, magnanimous move if he were to do it. Do you see it happening?
No. But I'm with Yogi Berra on this. It's hard to predict, especially about the future. You know, it's really, and I mean, Joe Biden, the last job he held before public office, I think, was mowing lawns for a quarter.
Well, I've known a lot of guys who mowed lawns who really went on to do great things, and I guess he'd be one of them.
Yeah, but I mean, most of us did a few things in between, you know? I mean, Joe Biden has really done nothing in his whole adult life, and then it looks like Jill Biden, or as she calls herself, Dr. Jill, I mean, she earned the doctorate, but how many of us use it? You could call me Dr. Charles, but if you had a cardiac arrest, you better call somebody else, doctor. The fact is, Jill is playing the role of Edith Wilson in all of this. She looks to be the power behind it.
You really think that?
Well, I don't think she's running policy, but it was very disturbing to a lot of White House aides to see Hunter Biden sitting in policy meetings. I doubt he was actually running policy either. I think that policy is now being run by unelected functionaries in the White House.
Does this reflect maybe where some of the policy moves that have gone way further left than Joe Biden ever exhibited in his career? This is way left of where he was most of his career. You think that that might explain why we've seen this push, really hard push to the left out of the administration?
I think that the main reason for it is the nature of the Democratic coalition and senior leadership's decision, which I think in retrospect was a mistake for them to kowtow to their progressive left. I mean, you saw in the defeat of Fire Marshal Bowman in New York that they were willing to pick a progressive, that's who won in the Democratic primary, but not someone as far left as Bowman. And then today, Kamala Harris said that she empathized, she understood all the anti-Israel riots. So they're still doing it. I mean, they're still playing to their left-wing agenda. So they got Bernie Sanders out of the prime position in 2020, thinking that Joe would move to the middle, but he hasn't. And that's really striking to me, because I actually don't think Joe is an ideologue. I think he's a weather vane.
Interesting. Okay, Donald Trump at this point. He's had a couple of pretty good weeks. He's gotten some court rulings that are in his favor. He's kind of held his fire on Biden more than I thought he would. I am kind of shocked that he hasn't been doing an end zone dance after the debate. He said some things, but he's been fairly measured. Are you surprised, and do you think he's learned a little bit from the last go-around?
I think he's learned, but I think he must be chomping at the bit to say what he really thinks. You heard a little bit of it when he was recorded in the golf cart the other day.
Yes.
Did you listen to the interview with Sean Hannity?
I did not.
So he was pretty restrained in that regard too. I mean, you know, I think that the point is, when your opponents are making mistakes, don't get in the way. Don't get in the news cycle.
Yeah, he's kind of been off the field here the last 10 days. He hasn't done much.
That's very smart. He's going to go to a rally. He's going to a rally in the next day or so in Florida, and there's always a chance that he'll he'll say something there. I think that the next big thing is really the choice of the vice president, and we could go into that if you're interested.
I'd like to ask you first about an issue that I didn't know anything about. I had never heard about Project 2025. I didn't know anything about it. That has come up. It's an overhaul. I guess it came out of the Heritage Foundation. It's a complete overhaul of the federal government. It would trim the federal government by a bunch. They talk about getting rid of the education department, expanding executive power in the White House by quite a bit. And I think the Democrats are starting to run ads on this. They're saying, you need to know what's in this Project 2025. Former President Trump is saying, I don't know anything really about this. Do you believe him?
Yes. What happens when there's likely to be a change of administration is that all the think tanks that are on the Democratic side or the Republican side begin to do planning efforts. This is what we should do.
It's like a wish list.
It's a wish list, but it's also a kind of job advertisement for the leading people in that think tank. The leaders of the think tank would like to be the chief of staff. They would like to be high-level appointees in the various departments. So the Heritage Foundation, AEI, Cato, all of these will begin to put out thought projects. And then the problem with that is that the more aggressive the proposals, the more the opposition party will try to link onto them. But it's interesting what the attacks on Project 2025 have made a number of statements about how radical it is about issues they didn't talk about at all. They say nothing about abortion. They say nothing about many of these substantive issues. It's really largely an effort to reformulate the government. But it's an odd thing to see Republicans saying that they want more power in the White House, and more, which in effect, it just reshuffles the power in Washington. I think a lot of Americans would like to see less power in Washington generally.
Charles Lipson, great to see you, my friend. I hope I see you in Chicago when we cover the Democratic National Convention.
Look for me through the firebombs. See if you can find me.
Do you think there's going to be trouble in Chicago?
Oh, 100%.
Wow.
I mean, there are groups that have been planning for trouble for months. They've said it. And the black swan in all of this is the hundreds of thousands of people who are gotaways across the border who've come, especially from the Middle East and South Asia, and have affiliations with radical Islamist groups, so you just don't know what any of them are going to do, either in the U.S. or in the upcoming Olympics in Paris. These would be high-profile places to attack, so it's a very dangerous time, actually.
Great to see you. I appreciate your time as always. And you can catch him. I catch him on Real Clear. You can go catch him for free on charleslipson.com. Thank you, Charles. Good to see you.
My pleasure.
When we come back, we're going to hear from the Republican Party chair, Gina Swoboda, as the Arizona delegation heads for the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. And we'll be there. We'll be back with Chairman Swoboda in a minute on Newsmaker. Welcome back on Newsmaker. The Republican National Convention opens Monday in Milwaukee. Arizona's delegation is led by my next guest, Gina Swoboda, elected chair in January of this year. Great to see you, Gina. Thank you for spending some time with us. You're already there. You're ready to go.
Thank you, John. It's awesome. It's exciting. I'm honored to be with you.
Tell me what the vibe is in the Republican Party right now, because there's so much chaos on the Democrat side, frankly. And unless I'm misreading it, it seems like the party is starting to really coalesce around Donald Trump. We saw Nikki Haley release her delegates. We hear that Ron DeSantis is going to speak. That's a bearing of a hatchet, if there ever was one. What do you make of where the party is right now?
I think we are united and we're energized. And yes, the Democrat Party seems to be in disarray and free fall, but we can't take that for granted. So we're going to work every day. The energy is very high, very positive, and people are looking forward to just continuing to push, 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 and run through the tape.
Now, you've got a big moment. If memory serves me, this will be my 11th convention, and we will be there covering it. So we're all going to, be hanging out, I'm sure. You've got a big moment on Tuesday night, I believe, when the roll call happens. I think it's usually Tuesday night. So they say Arizona, and you stand up and you give a pithy speech about Arizona, and you pledge your delegates to Donald Trump. Have you worked on what you're going to say, and can you give us any hints?
I got as far as the Copper State, Great State 48, proudly gives our 43 delegates to the future president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, the once and future president.
Short and sweet.
That's what comes out when I think about it.
Okay,
yeah.
You're not going to talk about the Phoenix Suns or the former world champion Diamondbacks. We're not going to get into that.
No, I might. I mean, I truly just want to focus on the president. I mean, to me, it's his moment. Our delegation is very proud to be there. We're proud to represent Arizona. But we're here for the president to pledge our support to him, representing what the voters of our party did in our presidential preference election.
How much of an Arizona flavor is this convention going to have? How many speakers will be featured from Arizona, and who will they be?
We're still waiting on the final set list, if you will, about who's speaking. I am hopeful we will have Arizona representatives up there giving a good vibe, a good Arizona vibe, so that everybody in the country and around the world that watches the convention can see how proud we are to support our nominee.
Do you think Kari Lake is going to have a speaking role at the convention?
I do not know. As I said, I haven't seen the list. She's a very excellent speaker, as you know personally, having worked with her for a long time. I await the final determination of the committee on arrangements at the convention.
This is airing Saturday night. By then, we might actually have a nominee. We don't know when Donald Trump's going to make the announcement. Do you have a personal favorite in that group?
I think that, I mean, there are a lot of names being bandied about. This is obviously, it's the president's choice. It has to be someone that he has an incredibly tight relationship with, that he trusts to represent him, to speak for him, to help him execute all his tasks and carry out everything he does. I'm familiar with all of the names that, we're all kind of hearing and seeing in the media, and I like them all. I know that sounds like a terrible kind of cop-out, but I do like them all. I will say, I think in the last week, in the list of names I've seen, which is kind of shrinking, in some of the media reports, they dropped Ben Carson off the list when they're talking about who is a potential nominee.
Yeah.
I am a fan of Dr. Carson, as I am of Governor Burgum and Senator Rubio and Senator Vance. I think all of these are great people, and I think we have to wait and see what the president thinks is the best thing for him.
Gina, tell me a little bit about, there was some talk, I think NBC reported, that there were 6 Arizona delegates that the Trump people were a little worried about, that they might go rogue. Is that, is that all passed? Is that all smoothed over?
Yes. Yes, it is. So I think that, and not just in Arizona, in a lot of states, we have very passionate grassroots that are very excited to nominate President Trump. And in the case of the Arizona delegates, there was a concern on the part of some of the delegates that something might happen and that the nominee that came forward would not be President Trump, that someone might make some kind of move for a contested convention. And as we know, as to our earlier point that we talked about in the lead-in, we're very united, and there is no other nominee.
Well, I mean, he won 92% of the vote in the primaries. I can't really see a path where that would happen. That seems like a pipe dream.
Yes, you and I agree. I can represent what I think those delegates were worrying over. And so I think by the time that kind of got fed up the chain by whoever was concerned, they were perhaps thinking it was the inverse, right? That people were trying to do something to prevent the president from having the nomination, when in fact, people were having conversations to make sure the president was getting
Okay.
the nomination. Yes.
Gina, you've lived in Arizona a while. You know, I mean, John McCain won 9 elections here. He was very popular, particularly among moderates. I know he had rifts within the Republican Party toward the end. There's no question about it. But is that McCain rift, do you think that that is now, is that breach starting to be filled and it's not as big of a deal as it was, do you believe?
I think so. And you know what I think accomplished that? I think the Democrats' total collapse and inability to govern has gotten us to a point where the majority of, I would say a vast majority of the people that in the party that are registered Republicans across the state of Arizona recognize just the complete failure of Democrat policies in their lives every day, both in the state, nationally, and around the world. And that did what we have tried to do as a party for several cycles. And I would say, to your point, we have failed to do, which is to unite us all behind one thing. And that thing is we have to win because we're running out of runway. And I am hopeful. We're not all going to agree, John. You know that. I always quote, there was that book, How the Democrats Won Colorado. And it talked
Yes.
about like the Teamsters and the teachers union all sat around a table. These are Democrat, stakeholders, and said, "Hey, we don't agree on these 5 or 6 things. We're not going to discuss these things till after we win control of the state of Colorado," and that is what they did.
So it's
That's much
pragmatism.
harder for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about is Donald Trump strikes me, I mean, he's still Donald Trump, but with Joe Biden's debate performance, I actually thought the old Trump would have trampled on Mr. Biden even harder. I am sensing, and I want to know if you are, that he is learning to hold his fire a little bit. Am I misreading this, or do you see it?
Well, from my perspective, and I don't know if this is Sun Tzu, but right, never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. So I think it's communications 101. Let you all in the media, let the people, let that storyline and the reality of what's sinking in across the country and across the world about Biden's complete failure to execute the job that he's been given, the most important job in the world. Let that sink in. Why interrupt and move us away from that discussion? It's an important discussion, and that's what we need to be talking about.
So you're not seeing necessarily an evolution of Donald Trump, where he's learned some things from past missteps?
Well, I'm from Queens originally, and so I'm used to President Trump. I have a lot of similar mannerisms and speech patterns as a president. So I personally have never thought that's a problem. But when we were discussing some of the people in our party in the state that perhaps they don't have that affection for the hyperbole of the linguistics of Queens, New York, right? I do think maybe the tone, maybe the things that used to agitate some people in our party are not there. I don't know if that's because they don't see it now because it's not happening, because it's never bothered me personally. I've never taken any kind of offense to it, but I think you could see that also in the debate, if that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, that too. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
There's kind of like an even tone, so it allows the listener to pay more attention to the content of the message. I interrupt all the time, John, so it's like, so it'd be hard for me to judge.
It's a New York thing. Gina Swoboda, thank you. Republican Party Chair for the state of Arizona. Stick around for a minute. A reminder, the Republican National Convention again begins Monday in Milwaukee, and I'll be there bringing you live coverage of Mr. Trump's vice presidential pick, the reaction to that, his acceptance speech on Thursday night, and every breaking event in between. So with that, we will take a break. Back on Newsmaker in a moment. Thanks for spending some time with us. Appreciate Gina Swoboda joining us, the Arizona Party Chair, and Charles Lipson. And I will see you next week from the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee.